In this video, we are going to discuss transactions. By default, SQL automatically commits insert, update, and delete commands. There is no way to undo a committed insert, update, or delete. However, you can group insert, update, and delete commands together to control when the transactions are committed. Grouping statements inside a transaction block gives you the ability to roll back or undo your transaction if something goes wrong. In MySQL, by default, transactions are set to auto-commit. We can look at this setting by typing select @ auto-commit and running it, and then we can see that auto-commit with a 1 is set to true. You could set it to false. If you did that, you would have to wrap every single statement inside of a transaction block. The definition of a SQL transaction is when you group a number of SQL statements into a single logical unit. And the reason that you do that is when you want all of the transactions to execute or none of the transactions to execute. In this example, I've got a customer wants to rent 3 videos, but if they can't rent all 3, they don't want to rent any. We've set this up inside of a transaction, and you can see these statements here. It starts with start transaction, followed by the statements that you want to run. And in this case, there's 3 SQL statements. And then what we have to do is some error handling. And in order to do some error handling, what I've done is I've placed the entire transaction inside of a stored procedure. Let me show you how the stored procedure works. You must first set the delimiter here, and I've set it to /. That tells it which end statement goes with the beginning of the create procedure. This delimiter says this is where the end of the transaction will occur, or the end of the stored procedure. Next, we give the procedure a name, and in this case we've given it test. We're not passing in any values. I've hard-coded the values that are going to be inserted. In real life, you'd probably set up parameters that could receive arguments for this procedure. Then we have the begin statement, and it also has this end statement here. Here's where we set up the error handle. It doesn't do much good to set up a transaction if you don't perform any error handling. In this particular example, I've set up these insert statements so the third one will fail because this number does not exist. It's going to throw an error. If you didn't have any error handling, the system would still run these 2 statements and then it would error on this one. But that's not what we want to have happen. If any one of the statements fail, we don't want to insert any of the values into the table. The error handling consists of first setting up a variable called SQL error, and this declare continue handler for exception is a key phrase in MySQL that says if there's an error, then set the error handler to true. What happens is this insert it looks to try, this one it looks to try, this one it looks to try, and it's going to find an error because of this. By default, the SQL error handler is set to false. That happens right here when it's declared. This says we're initializing the value to false. This is doing the data type. We get down here, and this error handler, if an error happens somewhere in here, it's going to set the SQL error handler to true and roll back the transaction. Otherwise, it will commit the transaction. If it commits the transaction, it's going to give us a message here that the operation was successful. If it's not successful, it's going to roll back the transaction and give us this error. The transaction was rolled back. Here is the end if that goes with the if statement. I'm going to go ahead and drop this procedure because I've already created it once. Now I'm going to go ahead and create the procedure. So I'll select all this code here, and the procedure was created. Let's look at our rental database. I have all of the transactions in the rental database ordered by the last update date. So you can see that these transactions are set for today. So now I'm going to go ahead. This is how you call your procedure. The keyword call and then the procedure name. So let's run that. We can see that the transaction was rolled back. And if we scroll up, it's because I forced this one to fail. Now, if I go to the rental database, we can see that it did not insert the first 2 rows, even though though they were valid statements, because the transaction was set up to either all or nothing. I can go back and drop my stored procedure and put in a valid number. I'm going to go ahead and recreate this procedure, and now I'm going to run the procedure. We can see that the transaction was committed. All three inserts were valid, and we can see that they were inserted into the database. In review, by default, SQL automatically commits insert, update, and delete commands. There is no way to undo a committed insert, update, or delete. However, you can group insert, update, and delete commands together to control when the transactions are committed. Grouping statements inside a transaction block gives you the ability to roll back or undo your transaction if something goes wrong.